Bookworms, my name is Kaylin and welcome back to my channel Thriving in Fiction. Today I'm going to be doing my June wrap-up. So for the month of June, I read 7 fiction books and 1 non-fiction book. So I thought I'd start with a non-fiction book first, and that is 400 Souls, and it's edited by Ibram X. Kendi and Keisha N. Blaine. And the subheading is A Community History of African America, 1619 to 2019. And those 400 years are broken up into 5-year intervals, and each 5-year period is given to different African American writers to tell narratives and stories or poetry within these 5-year intervals. I really liked this one because you got so many different perspectives, different narratives, different viewpoints, while also being taught about the progression and degression that slavery had. And I got the audiobook from my local library, and each author is narrating their own part. I loved that method of storytelling. I love when an author gets the chance to give voice and take the words that they've written and give them life. And I loved it even more knowing how personal and important it was to these writers to be able to tell these stories that often get lost in history. Not often, they always get lost in history. It was eye-opening and informative and heartbreaking and heart-wrenching while also having hope. I really enjoyed it. I've picked up quite a few books this year trying to expand and educate myself on what African American or African descended people experience within this society. And this was one of the ones that I enjoyed the most. So yeah, that was my 1 nonfiction book of the month. And the next book I read in the month of June is Fire by Kristen Kishore. This is the 2nd book in the Graceling Realms series. It's a young adult fantasy series. So this one is a prequel to the first book, Graceling. There's one character that has some overlap between the 2 books. Other than that, you have a whole new set of characters in a completely different country set in the same world. I really enjoyed this book. It was a quick read while also having a bit of a heavier theme, a bit of a heavier tone to it. It didn't shy away from violence or bodily autonomy. Like, it had some heavier themes to it. I did read this book when I was younger, back when it first came out. It definitely didn't hold up to a reread as well as Graceling did. I found at one point all of the female characters surrounding our main character is pregnant. I found that to be a strange choice in a young adult novel. So Fire is a human monster within this world, which means she is incredibly physically beautiful, which means she has an almost enchanting presence. She has an effect on the people around her, whether she means to or not. She also has some mind control abilities because of this. And I found the fact that some men in this world, some women too, couldn't control themselves and threw themselves at her, and I don't know, it felt strange to me on a reread as an adult. Like, what is the message we're sending here? Why can't these guys control themselves? That felt a bit strange. So I enjoyed my time with this book, but it definitely reads differently as an adult than it did when I was a teenager reading it. But I do plan on continuing with the series. The next one is Bitter Blue, I believe. And that one I'll be reading for the first time. I didn't read Bitter Blue when it first came out, so you never know. I enjoyed my time with it. Just some aspects of the story felt weird, hit different, read different as an adult than I did as a teenager. And the next book I read, I also listened to on audiobook from my local library, and it is Neverwhere by Neil Gaiman. Neil Gaiman, I don't know if there's any author out there who can create such a morbid, whimsical setting with his words the way Neil Gaiman does. It's very Tim Burton-esque, this slightly strange bend to what we think as whimsical. That is Neil Gaiman's writing to me. In this book, you're following Richard Mayhew, and he finds himself to have fallen through the cracks in London to the underground. A common theme that I love is watching these meek type characters get forced out of their comfort zone, and with that they find a strength that they never really knew that they had. I love that trope. I love that theme within books. And in fitting with the rest of the Neil Gaiman books that I've read, it was very dark, very funny, and I don't know, I love anything Neil Gaiman does. It wasn't my most favorite Neil Gaiman book. I think my favorite one that I've read so far is The Ocean at the End of the Lane, but this one was good too. But I still really, really enjoyed my time with this one. And the audiobook that I listened to was narrated by Neil Gaiman, and he is one of the few authors I would probably trust to narrate their own work of fiction. Like, nonfiction is one thing, you're kind of telling your own story, you're telling your own narrative, your own life history, your own experiences, but fiction requires such a performance aspect to it, and Neil Gaiman is awesome. I will listen to him read the phone book. And the next book I finished in the month of June, I also listened to on audiobook, and that is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. I did not enjoy my time with this book. So this book is set in the South in the 90s, and you're following your main character, Patricia, who is a housewife, and she has 2 children, and she joins a book club with more housewives. And then a stranger moves into their neighborhood, and he's a vampire, and he starts preying on the local black kids. I hated every single character in this book. They all sucked. Even her whiny children, I could not stand. I was rooting for the vampire to eat them alive the entire time. The only one I wanted to escape was the family dog. I went into this book maybe with too many expectations. I was expecting a subversion of tropes. I was hoping for some sisterhood amongst these women who started this book club, who then have to band together to take down this Dracula-inspired vampire. What I got were petty women with nothing better to do than look outside their window, write down license plates who they didn't recognize, nosy, unsupportive, gross women. Married to these women were a bunch of guys who apparently lacked the temerity to recognize that perhaps the person that they've chosen to spend the rest of their life with is an adult human being capable of making adult human being decisions. They were all condescending assholes. Every single one. Not one of these women married a guy who thought of them as equals. In the 90s. Oh my god, I hated every single character in this book. So I know you're probably asking yourself, why did you bother finishing this book that clearly you did not enjoy? And the answer is the plotting and the pacing. And also a secret wish of wanting the vampire to kill them all. So not only do you have this group of shitty characters doing shitty things to each other, you also have barely touched upon important themes such as discrimination and racism, the neglect of African American neighborhoods in America, domestic abuse, but nothing of substance is said about any of it. It's just all present. It's just all there, just all surface level, like, oh yeah. And the characters, they don't give a fuck about the vampire killing anybody. He's killing black kids. He's preying on the black kids in the black community, and now they don't care. The only one that cares is Patricia, the main character, but she lets it go. Kids dying, she lets it go. What bands them all together in the end is the fact that now he's preying on white kids. Their own kids. Their own. They don't band together to do anything until it's their own that's threatened. I hated everyone. I hated every single one of them. Oh, I hated them all. I hated them all. I hated them all. I wanted to see this sisterhood band together to take down this threat to their community. And ultimately, yeah, you kind of get that, but not without pettiness and cattiness. So yeah, I did not like this book. Did not like this book. Well written, well executed, well plotted, paced very well. I hated every single character. And the next book that I read in the month of June is The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. So this is an Indian culture and mythology inspired fantasy book. In this book, you're following Malini, who is a banished princess. She is the sister of the current emperor, and Priya, who is a member of a people who have been conquered by this empire. So Malini is banished and sent to a crumbling temple on the outskirts of the empire, and Priya is her maid in the temple. And in this book, you have a unraveling mystery that's the magic and the history of this temple and this world and this people that Priya is a member of. And you also have Malini, who is ferocious. I really enjoyed my time with this book. You have political intrigue, a really, really interesting and unique magic system, as well as a sapphic romance at the heart of this book. I loved Malini and Priya together. They balanced and offset each other so well. Priya was physically strong and capable. However, she wore her heart on her sleeve and was very emotional and vulnerable in that way, while Malini is very ferocious and strategical, political, and she's vicious, but she lacks physically. She's especially at the beginning, and like throughout this book, Malini is physically very, very weak because of what she's going through and what she's been through. But she is so strong mentally and emotionally because she grew up in this cutthroat political world. And I loved the political machinations. I love the Indian-inspired magic and culture and world. I just sunk into this world. I loved it. I loved it. It was such a good read. I highly recommend this book. It was such a good, fun read, while also having some very interesting thematic discussions on top of it. So yeah, The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. And the next book I finished in the month of June, it melted my brain. And that is Dune by Frank Herbert. Do you see this? I've never tabbed a book in my life. Do you see this? Where do I start with Dune? Do I really need to explain the concept of Dune? Does anyone not know at this point? You're following Paul Atreides, the son of a duke. He's sent to Arrakis, a desert planet, where the main commodity or fuel in this world, the spice melange, is. It's the only place in the universe, in the known universe, that this substance exists. And his father is given dukedom over this planet in a not-so-secret plot to get rid of the Atreides family because the Emperor is feeling threatened with how popular Leto, Paul's father, is getting. So from there, you're following Paul once he arrives at Arrakis, and war kind of breaks out between the Atreides and the Harkonnens, who are the former stewards of this highly valuable planet. And it broke my brain. This is, like, yes, there's a plot and there's a narrative and there's characters that you can latch onto and all of that, but this book is less about that and more about the themes and the philosophical questions that Frank Herbert wanted to discuss and talk about. This is a commentary on human evolution and technology, on environmentalism and religion, and what happens when that gets caught up in our politics. And it broke my brain. It melted my brain. Can I say I enjoyed it or it's my new favorite? I don't know. Give me more time with it. I think it's a book that you have to sit with. It's definitely a book that you will get more out of with more rereads. Absolutely. So I don't think I can answer that having only read it one time, but it is a work of art. I can tell you that. It is a work of art. And I respect the fuck out of it. And I mean, of course I got something from it. Look at all of these tabs. And it is a hero's journey. Paul definitely fits that trope for the most part, but it's interspersed with warnings. Heroes and messiahs possess too much power, and I don't think Herbert trusted them. I guess I could read you some of the quotes that I have here. Lord knows I got a lot. Greatness is a transitory experience. It is never consistent. It depends in part upon the myth-making imagination of humankind. The person who experiences greatness must have a feeling for the myth he is in. He must reflect what is projected upon him, and he must have a strong sense of the sardonic. This is what uncouples him from belief in his own pretensions. The sardonic is all that permits him to move within himself. Without this quality, even occasional greatness will destroy a man. Like, it's full of wisdom. There is no escape. We pray for the violence of our ancestors. And I don't think I can say anything about this book that hasn't been said already. It's a work of art. No more terrible a disaster could befall your people than for them to fall into the hands of a hero. When we give an individual too much power over us, as a nation, as a group, it's dangerous. It's so dangerous. So this is an amazing work of philosophical questions and themes. I do plan on continuing with the series and picking up the second one because I'm just so interested in where Frank Herbert would take Paul after this, because as much as he's building up his character and you're watching him evolve and gain new powers and new awareness, there's so much interspersed in between all of this that scream about a violent future. That Paul will fall, that messiahs are scary, and they should be. That we shouldn't be giving these people so much power over ourselves. And if I read this right, and I might not be, like I said, this book broke me for a little bit, so I might not have this totally correct, but it seems like Dune has built Paul up so much that Dune Messiah, or wherever it happens in the future series, it's just going to tear him down and show him to be the villain that anybody with this amount of power is destined to be. And that theme, that concept, I am really interested in. The fall of the hero. And I mean, I have to continue. Look at this. And the next book that I finished in the month of June is The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. So this is a continuation of the read that I'm doing. I started with The Hobbit last month. I'm reading a chapter a night at bedtime. I'm listening to the Spotify playlist as well as reading it physically. I love Middle-earth. I love J.R.R. Tolkien's prose, his writing, his world building. You know, every tree, every stream, every river, but it's beautiful and it sets the atmosphere and the tone so well. You feel like you know this world, you live in this world, you know these characters. I didn't like it quite as much as I fell in love with The Hobbit, however, but that might change with my reading of The Two Towers and The Return of the King. Like, I might love the entire series a bit more. But I really loved our characters. Frodo and his selflessness, and Sam insisting on being with him. I love our hobbits. I love following our hobbits. And Aragorn, I love the way J.R.R. Tolkien portrays masculinity within his world, because he has these big, tougher, leader type characters who are so soft and tender with each other, and I just loved it so much. So while I didn't like it quite as much as I loved The Hobbit, I might like it more once I finish the Two Towers and The Return of the King. And I still loved my time in Middle-earth. So yeah, The Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. I'm so happy that I'm finally getting to this series. And the last book I finished in the month of June is actually if I'm rating just on pure enjoyment, this is probably my favorite book of the month. And that is The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex E. Harrow. So you're following January as she tells you her story. It starts with her being 7 years old and this fierce, wild child running through the wilderness in Kentucky. You follow her throughout her years. And she grows up as a ward of Mr. Locke. He is an affluent white man. She is a poor brown girl. And she grows up as his ward in his mansion. And you're following her as she is bucking against the societal restraints she is under in Locke's house. She wants to be free, she wants to be fierce, and she is taught at every turn to shut up, mind your place, be a good girl. And within this narrative, you also have writings from a book called The 10,000 Doors. So the book opens up and you're with 7-year-old January as she finds a door or portal to another world. I loved this book. I loved January. The prose is lyrical and beautiful, and it sets this whimsical, romantic tone that I fucking loved. I loved watching January come into her own and find her own strength. I just love this book. And I picked this up right after I finished Dune, and it was exactly what I needed. It was the total opposite of this dense, philosophical sci-fi into this whimsical, romantic, carry you away fantasy. It was a perfect palate cleanser, and I loved this book. I loved the themes. I loved January and watching her find her strength. And the one quote amongst many that I tabbed here that stands out to me is, "I wondered if behind every good girl lurked a good threat." I love that. I connect with that. It was so relatable. These expectations that we put on young women, especially in the era, like in the early 1900s, it felt more constrained, obviously, but who doesn't relate to that? What woman doesn't relate to that? If I had a dime for every time I was told cursing isn't ladylike, like, do we worry about our sons being lords? No. Why do we worry about our daughters being ladies? Who can tell me? Those expectations are so fucking constraining. Being that relatable, I loved watching January buck and fight those restraints as much as she could. And that's why it's my favorite read of the month. Alright guys, so that was my wrap up for the month of June. Let me know in the comments below anything you've read. What was your favorite book that you picked up this month? Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you in my next one, guys. Bye!